Hello and welcome to the pod live. Day one of the draft is finished. I'm Oscar Hazel. I'm joined by Ian Wharton, and you can ask us any questions at Miami Pod. And the Dolphins have drafted DeVante Parker, which, if you've been following me, should not be a huge surprise. Ian, what's your takes on the pick first?
Not surprising. We've had Parker and Gurley. Those were, we knew those were their two guys. We've known that for like 3 months. As soon as the Browns took Sheldon, it was a done deal, pretty much, unless someone jumped up. It wasn't surprising. It's a really good fit. So I'm not super high on Parker as far as like just in general, but I do really like his fit for the Dolphins because the way he eats yards after the catch, the way he strides, he's a really big strider at 6'3". Very impressive at the catch point. He does a good job at finishing plays at the catch point, which is going to be nice because Miami lacks size outside. So this is their first big wide receiver on the roster now. He's that prototypical high number two, possibly a number one type. Not like a dominant. I don't think he's going to be a dominant number one, but that's just my own opinion. I know that others may disagree with that, and that's fine. Overall, I like the pick. I mean, in this first round, we just saw about 25 teams go straight need, and really reach on some guys, especially like after Miami. There were some major reaches, I thought. So I thought Miami did well. They got the guy they really wanted. On top of that, they got him at a good price. They didn't move up, which was really key. I think that they were considering moving up for him. At least they were willing to, depending on how the draft played out. No trades happening in front of Miami really helped. That would have been kind of a disaster situation if there were a couple moves and teams would have gotten desperate. But no one got desperate. Miami benefited. And I mean, look, the Dolphins receiver core is done. I mean, this is it. This is what they need for 2015. So, I thought that the last 3 years, Tannehill really had one of the worst supporting casts around him. When you look at offensive line and receivers and running game, obviously 2014 was a little bit better with Lamar Miller showing up. But now moving forward, I think that, if everyone stays healthy, which, you say that about anything, but if everyone stays healthy, this is a pretty good looking offense for 2015. I'd like to see another guard and I'd like to see another running back added to the mix, but you can add those at various points in the draft. So they got their guy, which is great.
When you talk about injury, I guess if we start with like the one knock on DeVonte's, he had a foot fracture. And that often has injury repercussions later on in the next year. In particular, there's Julio Jones, a couple other examples. I think there's quite a few examples of running backs or wide receivers where they have a foot fracture and then the next year is an issue. But then that's also kind of what's intriguing about him is he is still so productive when kind of not feeling at 100%, and when he was going through the kind of pro day schedule, he was saying he was feeling much better and more like he was in 2013. He was my top receiver on the Dolphins board. What kind of elevated him above Amari Cooper was particular traits I've isolated as ones that Dolphins covered, and he had 3 drops in the last 2 years. And so obviously we saw that with kind of Stills and Landry. They have a high percentage of catches caught within their kind of radius and not many drops. Particularly Landry had very little drops in his college year. A couple more last year, but not. I think they were kind of early on when the game was still a bit quick for him, and particularly in traffic. His catch radius is really impressive as well, and his body control. So those are kind of elements that we've seen move when this kind of rehousing of the wide receiver room's gone on. The traits that seem to be consistent are at least a couple of routes that are refined, and then body control, good hands, good tracking of the ball. And kind of, to me, DeVante Parker was the best of the lot. That's kind of where he excelled, his body control, high pointing the ball, making kind of catches that aren't necessarily easy, look easy, and he has a really wide range. Even if you look at a player like Matt Hazel, the 6th round pick last year, his body control was his main traits that, to me, was impressive. So I think that's something that either Hickey covet, or the coaching staff laser covet or Philbin covet, but Ireland didn't, or that's kind of hearsay, but it seems to be kind of a trait now that they like. So maybe should we just go through kind of how the first round went? And I guess, I mean, Jameis has kind of been talked about for ages, but no one kind of believed Mariota would go to the Titans. I love the pick. Kendall Wright's going to be free. Do you think they still trade him, or how do you think this works?
I think they keep him. I talked to a guy last night, and he said that basically Ken Whisenhunt talked himself into Marcus Mariota. They tried to sell this pick really hard, and it got to the point where they said, okay, either we get fair value, which is 3 first-round picks for this, especially to drop back in like the late teens and 20s. There weren't a lot of teams that wanted Mariota. Like, that's clear. All the smoke came from Tennessee, this entire process. So Mariota, if they wouldn't have taken him, I think that he would have either fallen to the Jets or maybe out of the top 10, maybe to like the Rams, so maybe just in the top 10. I think he's a good player, and he's a good fit there as far as their surrounding talent. I like what they have to put around him, but I think he's their long-term guy. They had to make the move, in my opinion. Ultimately, that's a team that needs to win, and Whisenhunt needs to be able to sell something to a new ownership group. You can sell Marcus Mariota. You can't sell Zach Mettenberger. Zach Mettenberger, at best, isn't maybe slightly below average quarterback at best.
The only way he's selling him is if Brett Cassell's your owner, and unfortunately he's not for the Titans. And I think that's kind of when you're getting like a project quarterback and one that has this stigma of you have to build a system around him, you kind of have that leeway and time, and you don't have that kind of off-field character or something like that where that becomes the blame, and say if so you blame that kind of thing, which has happened with Johnny. I think if Johnny was put in a more stable kind of upbringing in NFL terms, into a system that kind of fits his skills, not just make him run because he ran a bit in college and then designing runs for him, that's not how his game worked. So they didn't really allow him to progress. So I think it's an interesting fit in terms of the skill positions around him as well. If you think of obviously Kendall Wright, Justin Hunter, a vertical player, and then you have Delaney Walker as well. There's kind of like nice weapons around, a good offensive line. So I think that could work really well. I think that would be, and they play in a pretty crummy division as well. So he's going to be able to get some easy wins in his first year, I reckon. Maybe have a similar trajectory of a rookie year as a Teddy Bridgewater. Perhaps Matt gets the first couple of starts, hurts his arm or something like that, and then we see Marcus unleashed. Then Dante Fowler's kind of been like the consensus pick at 3, but I don't think anyone believed it. And then it happened really quickly. They put it in straight away. So I think maybe that's been talked about enough. And then Cooper was interesting that they passed on Leonard Williams, because I think Cooper was the consensus pick if Williams was going to the Titans. So I guess it makes sense in terms of they went after Cobb, and then you can kind of say, Cooper's that ilk of player. Have you any thoughts on that, or should we get to the Giants?
I thought it was interesting. I thought Oakland had an opportunity. It really just comes down to draft philosophy for guys like, teams like Oakland, Chicago. Do you want that top-end pass rusher, or do you want the top-end receiver? Personally, I'd rather go pass rusher, get a receiver later. But, it's hard to argue because Cooper's a really good player. He's going to step in day one, and he's a number 1 receiver, like right now. And I know that we like to fantasize about that for a lot of teams and a lot of players. We like to say, oh, yeah, he's going to step in as an immediate starter. That's actually true for Cooper. And, White is going to be a number 2 receiver. So, and maybe push Alshon to be number 2. So, in this draft, it's just one of those things where, if you're sitting there and it's like Brandon Scherff went number 5 overall, that's crazy to me. Brandon Scherf is a nice player, but Jesus Christ, you spent the number 5 overall pick on a guard that might play right tackle. That's crazy. That's unbelievable to me. He's not going to help them win a single game next year. Like, he's a good player, but he's not going to win a game for them. You need to take impact players, and that's where I can go back to Oakland and I can go back to Chicago and at least say, look, at least you got an impact player. And it's not necessarily just about playmakers, but it's about the quality of the player. And I just don't think Scherf is that type of player to build a franchise lineup, or a great offensive line around. So that's where it really comes down for me. And like you said, the Giants, Eric Flowers with Miami. That was kind of surprising. I know he had some buzz there at the end of the top 10 before the draft today. Where do you think they play him? Do you think they move him at tackle, then kick Pugh inside, or where do you think he fits for that?
His natural position is inside, probably at right guard, and then you play him at right tackle. I don't think ideally you don't really want anyone with limited foot speed to play tackle, but I don't see how you're playing someone at that size inside. And you kind of want to be at least fast with your hands, or like really fast inside. The game's much quicker. So even though he's kind of got limited foot speed, his kind of physical traits project more to outside. So I'd assume he'll be a right tackle. But it'll be interesting. I thought that was pretty terrible pick, personally, as well as Scherf to Redskins. I felt that was a reach as well. And people are just saying he's Zach Martin, but Joel Bitonio was better than Zach Martin. And it's just a person that played tackle, is projected to guards, doesn't make them the best guard in the league. Maybe we should go Leonard Williams when he ends up in the Jets. So this kind of puts in Wilk into a question whether he'll be traded. Jeff, who we had on the show a couple of weeks ago, reckons he's on the trading block now. So that'll be interesting, whether he moves or if they keep him for a year and have kind of free-headed monster on the D-line. But that's definitely something. He's really technically sound player. He'll be kind of an efficient pro. We're going to see him twice a year. Obviously, the first in week 4 in London. But I think he has a limited ceiling, but his floor is so high. Just his technique, his hands are disgusting for a 20-year-old. And he has like a rugby background. I think it was Sean, who's part of Bird Gang, which is Cardinals Twitter. He was telling me he didn't play any football for a while. He just played rugby. So he'll probably hurt Tannehill if he gets to him. Do you have any thoughts on that, or should we get to kind of the 10 till 13, which kind of really affected the Dolphins pick?
Only thing I'll say about Williams is I think that was the biggest surprise for me in the first 8 picks. Williams is really good, and that defensive line now is crazy. I didn't think that they would take him over like Vic Beasley or, that was just really surprising to me how they ended up picking a position of strength. But I understand it. He's a great player, and like you said, his floor is so ridiculously high. Is he going to be a 10-sack guy? No, he's not going to be that type of player, but he's going to be a really good player for the next decade for them. It's just, I don't see, only way he gets like a bust per se is if he gets injured, which he did have injury issues. Apparently he has a shoulder injury, or at least recovering from one at USC. We already know he had lower body issues, so that's the only threat that I see with him. But he was my number 1 overall player, and he's not Ndamukong Suh, so expectations kind of have to be realistic.
Years ago or something. That's what he's going to do.
Right.
Like really effective against outside zone, just like penetrative against the run. Just like uses hands so well, like so smart. So I guess he's a flashy player. Maybe that's why he fell, but he's effective.
Yeah, his awareness is so good too. Like his against the run is just ridiculously good.
And I think that's kind of the advantage of playing in the Pac-12 is you see so many different types of offenses. So you are a more pro-ready defender where you see spread, you see pro style, you see I formation. You even see kind of like the Arizona and Nevada offenses a lot. So you get like a huge mix. So that's kind of a good advantage for particularly front players out of the Pac-12. So if we go to Rams, I guess Gurley was kind of the hot name the last week, in particular for the Dolphins. So thankfully the Rams swallowed him up before we can have any misery drinking. How do you think about the fit? I think there's already been out that Zach Stacy's agent wants a release or a trade. So that's kind of adds another kind of narrative into it. But how do you think about the fit, and just from a surface?
It's interesting. It's definitely interesting. That series of picks from Gurley to Parker, like in between there, is really interesting. I like Shelton a lot in Cleveland. Wayne's with the Vikings. It's a good fit. It's similar to Miami's defense. So, if he's playing cover 3 man, or even, I guess, cover 4, because, they don't really have a great free safety. They don't roam as much as Miami does. It's a little bit more similar to Miami and Cincinnati, so they'll drop their linebackers a lot into covers to help on the inside stuff. So that'll help protect Wayne's. Gurley with the Rams is, it's a loaded running back situation. That was really strange to me. I get the whole add an elite talent thing if you think he's elite. I think they just got their next Steven Jackson, which is great, but Steven Jackson didn't win him shit. So, I don't see Gurley winning him shit on his own either. They don't have enough around him. They don't have an offensive line. They don't have a quarterback. It's crazy to me that they would take a running back there.
You've got to think they're going to go after a guard at some point in the second day, and then you kick Robinson out to left tackle and hope he has like an
but that's the thing. Though, is like I thought Andrus Peat was such a good fit there. Like they need a right tackle too. So I mean, it's just I don't know. They've invested a lot into that offensive line, and maybe that was it. Maybe the fact that they've continuously invested there and they keep missing because of injuries, misevaluations, whatever it may be. It's hard because that offensive line still needs 2 starters. So to add a running back, I think is just really tough, especially a guy that came from a really good offensive running team that had huge holes for him. And I'm not saying that his vision is going to be an issue, but it's going to be more difficult.
So to go Pete to the Saints is really interesting to me.
That was really surprising.
I assume he's going to right tackle, and you keep Terron at left tackle, or do you think the other way around? I guess they've kind of had this thing where they spent a couple of years trying to get to the zone scheme. They've obviously got Unger, who's been playing in the zone scheme, but then Pete can do anything. He failed my Dolphins metric for offensive line, which was interesting because on tape it doesn't look like he should do, and players like La'el Collins passed it. So whether there was kind of an injury thing there or something. But it'll be interesting how they kind of organise that line now. Who will go to the right, who will go to the left. Terron Armstead, I think, is one of their kind of better young tackles, particularly from that class. He went in the 3rd round. I think he's played better than the 3 first 4 picks in that class. So I think that'll be really interesting how they kind of set that up. I think the Saints have had kind of quite a peculiar draft so far, with their last pick being Stephen Anthony. I don't think anyone kind of thought he would go in the second day and the first day either. He was kind of a mid second day kind of prospect. So they're obviously going on kind of upside there. So then we get to that kind of, I think that all kind of played well into Dolphins' hands in regards to kind of how the board fell to them. I think they probably had, for my liking, I think they would have had, in my opinion, they had Parker as a top 5 player in this class, probably as their second wide receiver, if not top. So I think they're probably quite ecstatic with how it all kind of fell, and that they didn't need to kind of spend any assets to get up. And do you think that was kind of partly because players like Kevin Johnson were kind of around there, and maybe a Nelson Aguilar, there wasn't kind of, because we saw maybe the reach of a Eric Flowers and a Gurley above and a Danny Shelton that kind of pushed down enough so they didn't need to move up?
Yeah, I was. I wasn't shocked that it played out that way for Miami. But yeah, definitely looking at the board. Once you got past, I thought the Rams were like a dark horse candidate to take Devontae Parker. Once we got to that point, it was just about trade. Cleveland was never going to take a receiver at 12, in my opinion. Just following all the buzz was always about Shelton. Like, if they didn't trade up for Mariota, then it was going to be Shelton. That's just kind of what I had seen, for a couple months leading up, and especially here in the last 2 or 3 weeks. Usually you see real rumors. Like, the last 2 or 3 weeks before a draft are usually very real. Obviously, there's going to be some ridiculous stuff thrown out there. You just have to kind of use your best judgment on that. But, that's a good fit for them. If they can stay healthy, that's going to be a really nice defense. The Saints kind of took it down to the wire with their pick, and I was wondering if maybe there was a trade. Miami did the same too. Miami did take their time with their pick. But I think Parker was always their guy. Like, I think if it was Parker and Gurley on the board, that would have been really interesting to see, and I almost wish we would have seen it, just because I truthfully don't know which one they had above. But like I said, we've known for a couple months that Parker and Gurley were there for the top 2 guys for Miami. They're very fortunate, because I had talked earlier on the Finn side about, someone had mentioned, what about if we move down for Parker and then take him a couple picks later? But right behind Miami, 49ers, I think, really wanted Parker. They traded down as soon as Miami announced their pick. The Chargers could have used a receiver. They took Melvin Gordon, but they could have used a receiver. And the Texans definitely could have used a receiver. So I don't think Miami really could have moved down. I think that would have been a really dangerous move. But, Miami's really happy. I think right now Miami is really excited about their pick, and they should be.
So you talked about Melvin Gordon. Was that kind of do you think anyone else was close to taking him in that range, or do you think the Chargers kind of just got a bit scared? Maybe they saw Parker go off the board and they wanted kind of a skill position player. So they were like, he's the last of their top kind of 15 or so, or impact players. Because that's the reason I can imagine them going up.
Yeah, like I didn't see the price for the move up for the Chargers. Did you see that?
It was like, I believe it was a 4th and like a future 5th, something like that.
Okay, so I mean, yes, that's really dirt cheap. And, we had seen Todd Gurley kind of rumored to the Texans. I don't know if other people had seen that, but I'd seen a couple mocks by experts where he had fallen that far to them, and they would take him. So, maybe they just had an inclination that either someone else was about to jump them. We knew that the Chargers liked Melvin Gordon. Like, that has not been a secret. So either they felt like someone else was about to move up, or they felt that that the Texans might have taken him. And the Texans kind of just went best player available on their board, which is really cool. They were one of the first teams to do that. I think they were one of like 3 or 4 in the top 20 that really did that. But yeah, I think it's kind
of an obvious pick.
Yeah, for sure.
And then the Peters one's really interesting. So obviously he's going to be opposite Sean Smith now, so that'll be kind of a interesting pairing. Peters is my top player overall, so I think that's obviously a great value. And I think Rappaport came out saying that they loved him when they had him in the building, and Steve Sark banged the table for him, telling him he was one of his favourite players to coach. So that's kind of an interesting nugget. There's been kind of lots of kind of different leaks about him as a player and stuff. So I think people who have been banding him in the same kind of waving the same red flag for him and Dorial Green-Beckham. I think every tweet I see about red flags has both their names, and it's pretty frustrating when one is, well, for the first part, Peter's issues were on the field, not off the field. And then they're far less severe than being caught with large amounts of cannabis and being arrested with suspicion to deal cannabis. That's a lot different to having an argument with a coach and getting kicked off a football team, in my opinion anyway. So I think maybe that kind of settles that narrative. We'll see where Dorial Green-Beckham obviously hasn't been picked yet. The Saints were kind of one of those teams that were kind of linked with him. So the fact they went with a player that wasn't kind of perceived as like a consensus value late in the first maybe kind of indicates where they view whether he can get Dorial Green Beckham later if they do like him. I think the 49ers were another team that were kind of linked with Dorial Green Beckham as well. So maybe they're teams to look in the second day. So the Eagles just got Macklin for 10 million cheaper. I don't think there's really much to talk about that. Cedric Kabue going to the Bengals is like perfect. Yeah. That just feels like he's going to have time to like heal up, and that's just like he'll do a little bit of his own stuff, do a little bit of they like teach up really good. So if he just gets his punch right, he'll be the best tackle probably in this class. So that's like a perfect fit. I think we always talk about like quarterbacks needing time to develop, but sometimes like other positions do as well. And if you get a year grooming as a left tackle, I think that's really helpful. And it helped Terran Armstead a lot with the Saints having kind of
especially. And I don't think that gets talked about a lot is that like, these kids that come from quick set offenses where the tackle's just, he's already in his pass pro, like as soon as the play starts, because I mean these teams are passing so much from college, and especially like Texas A&M. They're already doing quick sets.
Rush the whole time, so you're not even playing pass protection.
Right. So I mean, I definitely agree. Like experts made that link a couple days ago, and ever since, like that just caught fire. And I was like, oh my gosh, that makes so much sense for them to take him there. That's such a perfect fit for them.
Guys, and they can even pay him inside. He paid right guard a little bit, so he can play inside. And for the first year, then you move him out. How like the Greg Robinson plan was, even though that didn't kind of work out as intended. Then do you want to go with the edge guys? I guess with Bud Dupree, Shane Ray. Have you got any? I think the Broncos, Shane Ray. That's just kind of like getting back Dumerville for fax errors. But Shane Ray is kind of interesting, and Bud Dupree. I kind of went back. Those are two prospects I didn't really know where to like put them or what to do with them. So, have you got any thoughts about those kind of fits?
Yeah, I like the Dupree fit. So Dupree, I thought that's where he should have gone as far as value. In this class, I thought it was kind of surprising that he fell so far. He was getting like top 5 buzz, as we talked about before the show. I had heard that he was in play as high as number 4. So for him to go to 22, I think that's where he belongs. He needs time. He is so raw with his hands. Like that dude just likes to like flop into people and then just out athlete them, which is fine. I mean that wins on the college level, but he's a high impact guy, and that's a really rare pick for them. Like I hope people understand, like the Steelers are one of the least analytical teams in the league based off of their picks, and they're starting to get away from that. And Dupree's really the poster boy for that now. Guy is an absolute freak of an athlete, so I like that pick. I think that that's the right time to take a flyer on a guy like that. Shane Ray, I'm not a fan of. Now, I think the situation is better than what it would have been, say, he go to Atlanta. So if he went to Atlanta, he'd be the primary pass rusher. He'd have to be their Cameron Wake. In Denver, he can be a third down pass rusher, come in specifically on pass plays, and he can just jump snaps and get into the backfield and not even worry about the run game. I think that's a good role for him. I have him as a third-round value, which is really kind of harsh. It's just kind of how my grading system works. It doesn't help players that aren't full-time players. I really look for like above-average starters. And if you're not an above-average starter to me, or at least have good potential to be, reasonably, you usually get punished in my grading system. And that's kind of what happened to Ray. Like, he's not a bad player, and I hope that people will take that away. But, 23 for me is a little rich, but that's a good situation because he's the third pass rusher there. So it should be good.
Kind of matter. Like, we don't really need to talk about that. That's just like a boring pick. Then the next two, they've been kind of linked a lot, like Shaq Thompson to Panthers. I think he was their only visit. And they've kind of, with Thomas Davis and Kuechly, they can just have like huge linebacker zones and just make it really easy on their corners. But that's kind of like a really strange way to build a defense where you just have awful corners kind of made up for by just having your linebackers do absurd things. So whether that has any long-term stability, we'll find out. Maybe that's kind of the core, and then eventually they get good corners and you actually build a good defense. And then Perryman's been kind of, I think that's been the obvious link with the Ravens for ages, just a Flacco pass interference tool. They needed someone to do that, so he kind of fits that mold perfectly. Just is going to get like 100 flags this season. And then Byron Jones, who I think a lot of people had going to the Eagles, not the Cowboys, so that's kind of interesting. What's your take on that kind of fit? I guess the Cowboys needed some help there anyway, so that kind of works. But I think that's kind of, we've seen the Cowboys be maybe safe, and then this is kind of like a projection pick, somewhat more so than they have done.
I was surprised that they let Randy Gregory get past him. Byron Jones is, I get it. I get the appeal with him. He can play free safety. He might be a better free safety right now than a cornerback. It's interesting for them because they ended up passing over a pass rusher, and I love cornerbacks. I really do, but pass rusher like Gregory in that system would have been a huge difference maker right now. Jones, he needs time, so we'll see how it plays out, but that was a little bit surprising to me. I thought the end of the first round was a very interesting run on needs outside of the Colts. The Colts adding Philip Dorsett was pretty crazy. And I like the player.
They just need U players. They just want all the U players. They don't care where they go.
Yeah, seriously. They are really interesting, man. Like their draft tendencies. I mean, they get good players. Dorsett's a good player, but it's
is that it? Like a Miami Coke connection for Irsay? Or like it's got to be something like that. This is just absurd to like premier, like two of their biggest free agency and their first round pick all U players, and like not really needs. Or like I guess you could say Andre Johnson and Gore feel pretty like Gore at least felt a huge need. Andre Johnson kind of just takes over from Reggie Wayne. But it'd be interesting. Dorset, maybe that just means that they're not going to re-up. What's his name? I can't remember. Ty something or other.
Who?
The third round pick they had like a couple of years ago.
Oh, gotcha.
So maybe they're just not going to re-up him, and they just have Dorset replaced as that kind of like, or maybe this is Arians leaving, and then they feel they just need to have more guys like that. I don't know. Latham Tomlinson, I think that's. I would have drafted him first overall just from his pre-draft interview, and his mum has a great accent, so we can leave that at that. Demarius Randall, he had loads of hype about going to, was it the Eagles? I think, kind of like the last kind of week or so. So,
yeah.
So it's kind of weird for the Packers to end up going on like one of these hype kids. It normally feels like they take one of the kind of more solid players you've been hearing about all year that other teams will like let fall. And I'd assume he's going to be like a nickel corner to start off with.
Yeah.
But what's your kind of take on him in that fit?
Yeah, even long term, like I don't see where else he plays. He's not a willing tackler, and he's not an especially good tackler when he does try. So it definitely, to me, screams that they're trying to just replace Tramon Williams as quickly as possible. They lost him to free agency. I'm not a big Randall fan. I had him in the third round as like a poor man's Jimmy Ward. Last year, he was a first-round pick. And I know this is a weak class, but I feel like there's a lot of slot cornerbacks. They could have taken, Quandre Diggs in like the third or fourth round, probably Lorenzo Doss, and those guys don't meet their height requirement. And, I understand that, but ultimately you just need good players. And I don't think that's a really good value, especially for a team needing, one or two inside linebackers right now. Like they took a guy that was, a little bit of a reach. I know that the NFL was higher on him. Like you said, he was linked as high as like 15 or 20 or something. So I guess in that term, compared to what some people thought, I guess it was a decent value, but it's not a bad pick. It fits a need, and they had a clear right away need for it. But, for Stephon Anthony to go right behind him, I think that was kind of missing out because I think Anthony was probably a target for them.
And then Malcolm Brown was the last pick of the first round. So I guess he's taking Will Falk's kind of role and then can also play some free Texas, kind of adding a more versatile player. And maybe you can move around him and Easley quite nicely and do some kind of interesting things if Easley comes back healthy. Have you got any kind of thoughts on that before we get to kind of potential players in the second round?
No, I mean, I'm not a big Malcolm Brown fan for the Patriots. You know, people scream about versatility for him. He's good at one position, and that's it. You know, at least from what I saw on film, and I watched some other games that weren't on Draft Breakdown, so maybe that's why I didn't watch the right games or something. But he's a one-year wonder for them at Texas, and he'll play in a rotation there, which will help. That'll really help his development. Stephon Anthony at Clemson, that was interesting. Great athlete. Very, very surprising first round. I just didn't think that they would attack offensive tackle and linebacker. So interesting closeout to the first round. I think things really – they didn't get zany. Like, I thought this would be a crazy first round. But really it didn't get out of whack until the Panthers took Shaq Thompson. And really then, I mean, that's not a huge stretch or like a huge shock pick. I mean, these were kind of reasonable picks. It was just a little surprising toward the end there.
It was crazy. It was so calm. And it's like you felt like something mental was going to happen at 2, and then the Titans just took Mariota, and it's like, well, that's mad that something crazy didn't happen.
Yeah, right.
Was something crazy is happening.
Yeah, we had heard like this whole process, like how crazy it's going to be, and like, and we really sipped the Gatorade, I guess. And
that kind of like Eagles like bid that was going around, where it was like every single Eagles player and like a load of first round picks, and it's like the Titans are stupid for not taking this. But then, like, aren't the Eagles stupid for offering that? It's like, maybe it just was never offered. But maybe we'll find out more about that later. As we're talking about Malcolm Brown, and this kind of leads to those kind of report that Brockers was available, is on the trade market, and Dolphins were interested with quite a few other teams. Cowboys one in particular. I can't recall any others. But that kind of leads us to believe, what I've been thinking anyway, that we'll be looking for a free tech at some point to kind of spell Earl Mitchell, because I don't really think Earl Mitchell can do much at free tech. So kind of who are your guys if you're looking at the second round? I'm assuming it's going to be O-line, free tech, corner. So is it like Bennett, Anderson, Xavier Cooper, kind of guys like Hardison, your Arizona State guys? Anyone else other than those 4, or who out of those 4 would you like the most?
No, I mean those are the guys. I'm really high on Michael Bennett. I would not advocate a day 2 pick on a 3 tech. I don't think. Just looking at needs, you know, if they move down in the second round, grab a 3rd round pick. I love Michael Bennett. I've got him as a top 15 player in this class. I think he's just a tremendous pass rusher. But I've seen him every game of his career. So, I mean...
Yeah, you are a Buckeye fan, so slightly
well, yeah. I don't grade like I really don't. I don't think that had anything to do with it. But I do love him. I've had a lot of exposure to him, so I feel very comfortable with him. You know, if they were to grab him, it's a really good fit of a long-term position, especially with Mitchell being his contract up after the year, especially with those young guys. Like, we don't know how those young guys are developing, so, you know, I don't think that'd be a bad pickup in the second round, even though it's not a huge need. It's one of those things where, you know, you just want a really good player, and sometimes if it's not a huge need and you end up with a great player anyways, I mean, no one's going to complain about it. So,
what would you spend on Brockers then, if you were? Because obviously he's coming up on a contract year.
I'm not a huge Brockers fan. I think I'd probably give like a 4th round pick for him.
Okay. Yeah, I was thinking like a future 3rd, which kind of equals a 4th.
Yeah,
I would assume they would take that as that's kind of what you're getting as a comp pick anyway.
Yeah, and you know it's hard to project that because we haven't seen NFL teams do that a lot, where they're trading guys in their contract year. It's really an NBA type thing, and a baseball thing. So it's kind of hard to get that. He's a good player. I wouldn't be mad at the trade, like you said. I think talent wise, it's like Kenny Stills. Like I think Kenny Stills was like a 2nd round value in my book, but you know he's got some character concerns. And he's got 2 years left in his deal. So that knocked him down to a 3rd round. I think Brockers is the same way. He's probably a third-round talent. He's a good player, but contract year, you're inheriting a new player, so it might knock you down to a fourth-round pick. I think those guys are definitely the three techs. I like Xavier Cooper a lot. I don't know how far he'll fall, but I feel like no one's really talked about him too much. So maybe they'll get a really, really, really good deal on him in like the fourth or fifth round, and I don't know. Just hope. Because he would be a really nice fit.
And what about Preston Smith? I reckon he could be like a OV kind of player where he plays free tech and nickel. Would that be someone, if he fell to the Dolphins second round pick, you would, as like kind of a edge rusher, nickel interior player? Or are you kind of looking elsewhere, like corner and offensive line still kind of, there's good value there?
Yeah, I mean, as much as I like guys like Preston Smith, I'm personally not looking there. I'm looking to shore up that offensive line. I really think Miami's offense is really, really close to being very good. I'd like to see a guard. I'd like to see either Jake Fisher or Ali Marpet. I'm not sold that Fisher can play guard, but, I'd be willing to roll the dice on him for sure. TJ Clemmings is still out there from Pittsburgh. I'm not sure how he scored in your metric.
He passed. He was my second on.
Visually, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Like just watching him play, that doesn't surprise me. If Miami could get one of those guys,
offensive lineman ever though.
Really?
Yeah, he's like out of all the players. So I've had like a separate offensive line metric for about 7 years, and he's the best ever score. So he comfortably fit within there, but he's just, because he kind of was hurt a bit and you haven't really seen him play left tackle, his hand can sometimes get a bit lost, but he's generally quite good. He doesn't have great power either, but that's coming from being a former tight end, so he's relatively new at the position. But so yeah, he was kind of my fourth offensive line, but I would prefer him to TJ Clemmings, even though I have him graded low, if that can make sense. Just I like the things he does, and I think he has a high ceiling. And Zambarillo is another guy I don't think many people talk about. I have him above Marpet, but I think he'd be really good. I think he can play probably 4 positions on the offensive line other than centre. So he'd be another guy where I don't think anyone's really talking about him. He could fall into the hundreds kind of pick. And then with the corners, there's the Florida State kids are still out there. The Oregon kids, Steven Nelson, Dejon, and Eric Rowe. So it's any of those who you would think that the Dolphins would be really targeting at that 50th spot if they're not trading down.
I mean, Nelson makes perfect sense. We've talked about him a lot, and I think he'd be a really nice addition. I think he could play year one. He's one of the few cornerbacks I think that could really come in right away and at least play. The goal, I don't think, is for a rookie to play corner, especially at this point now that we're in like day 2, day 3, that range. I think your hopes kind of go from day 1 competing for snaps into year 1 learning, getting ready for next year, maybe playing if there's injuries, which there's always going to be injuries, not just Miami. Every team goes through cornerback injuries. I would love Nelson. I love Eric Rowe. We've talked about this before, though. I think Rowe is more of a safety for Miami.
Yeah, I have him as a safety for Miami, just like his size and athletic traits kind of seem to be in correlation with what they like at safety, in the similar ilk to Walt Aikens. So I guess if you're looking at need, Eric Kendricks, if he continues to drop, he's kind of like the no-brainer for me. Is there anyone kind of like a surprise, like of those 3 positions we kind of talked about, or if another linebacker you could see going?
Kendricks is gonna be interesting to watch, just because it came out that he may have a knee issue. Other than that, go ahead.
Oh no, I hadn't heard that knee issue. So
yeah. Arif had sent out something from, I don't know if it was Bob McGinn's article or it was an article. Arif sent it out though, and it was something that at least one team had red flagged him for his knee. If that's the case, we don't know where Kendricks could go. He could go anywhere from second round to fourth round. Health stuff, that's where these guys fall, and usually as the public, we just have no clue why, and it happens every year. The other linebackers, I'm not entirely too high on most of these other linebackers. Ben Heaney out of Kansas is an interesting guy. Is he I don't know. I mean, I could sit here and make an argument that Tripp, could be that Miami already has on their roster, could be at least this year. Just looking at 2015, Tripp may be a similar impact as Ben Heaney. He's a good player, but he's got his own issues. He's got his own instincts issues that he doesn't always get to where he needs to on run plays, especially. So, if Miami can't get Kendricks, I'm not really too sure that that's a second round realistic option. You may be looking at day 3 where you're getting a 2-down player like Jeff Luke, Taiwan Jones, that type of player that can still play. But you're not necessarily getting a 3-down dynamic starter.
And they probably need kind of a couple of special team players, whether that's in undrafted free agent or the kind of last 2 rounds. Just with the kind of the lack of depth they have now and getting rid of a couple of starters, they probably need a few guys just to bulk up the special teams core, although that's not particularly interesting to talk about. So who would be your kind of like ideal pick then in the second round, or are you hoping for a trade down?
I'm hoping for a trade down, and then I'm really hoping for Ali Marpet out of Hobart. Man, he's just the total package. He's got everything, and I think that he's a left guard, perfect fit. And I think day 1 he can come in and play, and that would really cap off Miami's offense. He can add a power back later on, late in the draft, or even probably an undrafted free agency. So I would really love Marpet. I think that's a home run pick. The other guy I would look at is maybe Steven Nelson or Eric Rowe. I think both of those guys are great players as well.
Well, we'll predict 2 trades down in the second, pick up Marpet at the end of the second, and then you move up to get Steven Nelson at the top of the third. So the Dolphins will do that, and then we'll see you tomorrow evening when that happens. Have you got any last thoughts on the Devontae pick? For me, it's just, I've talked about it so much, I don't think I need to kind of expand anymore. But have you got any kind of last thoughts? Or?
No, I think Dolphins fans should be pretty happy with this. It really went as well as it realistically could have for Miami, I think. I would have loved to see Marcus Peters, but I get it. The wide receiver core is done now, at least for this year, especially if a guy like Hazel or Rashard Matthews can step up as the 4th, 5th receiver.
Well, no one asked us any questions, so we won't answer any. And the sun's starting to rise here, so I'll finish drinking. Thanks for watching. That's been Ian Wharton. You can follow him at NFL Film Study. I think I got it right that time.
Yep.
I'm Oscar Hazel. Don't follow me. I'm just going to be only followed by Houston Texan cheerleaders now. So I'm going to cull all of you. I've got 4 Houston Texan cheerleaders, so I'm about 10 away from having like a good solid following.
Could have a good party with that.
Doing another show tomorrow, so after the last pick. So see you then, and hopefully we'll have at least more than one edition tomorrow with a couple of trades down. Right.
Yeah.
Cheers, Devontae.